is National Poetry Month. And we've had 3 wonderful programs. This is our 3rd program in a series to celebrate poetry. And we have 2 delightful poets tonight who have a wonderful program planned. So I'm going to get it kicked off by introducing you to one of them, Ken Meisel. Ken Meisel is a poet and psychotherapist from the Detroit area. He is a 2012 Kresge Arts Literary Fellow, Pushcart Prize nominee winner of the Celery Prize, and the author of 8 poetry collections. His recent collections include Our Common Souls, New and Selected Poems of Detroit, Mortal Lullabies, The Drunken Sweetheart at My Door, and others. He has work in Rattle, Crabtree Creek, Concho Review, San Francisco Pedro Review, The MacGuffin, and others. His new book, Studies Inside the Consent of a Distance, was published by Kelsay Press in January of this year, 2022. Please welcome Ken Meisel.
Thanks, Susan. I see the names flash up on the screen. All my favorite Michigan writers are here. This is both joyous and intimidating because I'm looking at some of your names, knowing how each of your work has inspired and touched me. So I am thrilled to see some of the names here. Too many good ones to mention, but my God, let me just extend my gratitude to you already for the work that you've done and how it's helped me grow as a writer. Thank you, of course, to Susan for being such a good hospitality host. So I'm just going to launch in by explaining the title of my book because it's so professorial and wordy. And so really what happened was after the election in 2016, I found myself writing to try to understand the nexus of violence and reactive violence in our country. Not that these are political poems. Mostly became much more interested in how consent forms the rhythm and ethics of a system, a society, and violations of consent produce symptomatic violence and tribal breakdown. And so I found myself writing poems about that. And then I got sort of bored with that and let the subject expand a little broader. And so the poems that exist in this book are just poems that study and reflect on the beauty of consent agreements and the violence or disrepair or misalignment that happens when they are not honored, whether it is in love or with animals or nature or with other systems. And so that's the spirit of this. The second thing I'd say, those of you who know Joy and know myself, I think we're poets of spirit. And in other words, I think we're both quite preoccupied with the way spirit fires inside substance. And so much of our work tries to uphold the inner light of spirit in anything that we write about. And so I think that that's a unifying theme that draws me deep and close to my friend Joy. And I have the pleasure of introducing her after I read. I'll say a little more about that. For those of you who don't know that, this new book is dedicated to Joy because I am forever in her debt for her generosity and her fervent literary gift. And so I offer this book again to you, Joy. So I'm going to start with the title poem in my book. It's called Studies Inside the Consent of a Distance. I don't think I ever asked a tree permission to touch it. Suddenly, this is hurtful to me, that I could fail a tree so, like never noticing its bark ridges as something of its personal skin or its face, and the fingers simply caressing it, free from any deeper contemplation of it, like studies inside the consent of a distance, without ever even asking for consent. Or the water's soft rumpling, just laying so languidly there in its sleep-time morning bed. I never asked it whether I could even climb into it, to swim there in it, within it. Me somehow just giving the vodka of my body over to a lake's smooth likeness in a kind of drunken assumption. Me jumping into this strange water without ever even asking it. Wishing is a kind of trickery. It stirs a naked impulse in us. Even the bird up there above me eyes me warily, like I'd assume power over its wings, its soul. I'm thinking I'm sorry about this, that a bird could mistrust me, see in me that evil wish, that deed to take without consent, its order. Living one's life by the shade of true love is just a study inside the consent of a distance. That we may exist together is to inhabit, it is to adore, to ask a blessing of the beautiful at stake here. The world so full of grantings, its faces, its lives. That's all I'm saying right here, right now. All the trees, the birds, the waters savor it. To love is to consent to the distance of another. And then, by slow degree, come safe closer. This is my promise to the water, to the trees, to the singing birds, and to you. When I watched Stephen Dunn read 10 or 12 years, 15 years ago, Stephen had a small pint of whiskey in his suit coat pocket. And so I'm dutifully sipping a small glass of whiskey here in honor of our friend Stephen. This next poem is called Fatherhood. And it's a sweet little poem that commemorates when my daughter was beleaguered by a witch in her bedroom when she was 5. And, it was me that was awakened at 3 a.m. because my beloved wife can sleep through anything. And so I was the one that had to get up and kill that witch with her. The deeper conceit in this poem is that the consent into fatherhood is to enter into the abyss of someone else, a child. And that abyss in a child is immense. And that's what this poem really celebrates. Fatherhood. The abyss found me. I'd been thirsting for it for days, without even knowing it. It sought me after midnight in smoky hours, jazz clubs, and cold pickup bars, and through the soft, expressed touch of lips. Maybe it was attempting to show me that one must give in to the consent and to the expressed abyss of another. What it requires of someone that they must give if they're to be guided by the greater impulse of the abyss. I can't recall moving from the indifferent to the engaged, but that's what the leap into the abyss does. It understands being alive is about the original abode of life, that wellspring, that pleasing, shapeless glimpse into the unknown, making itself expressively known in the self. Didn't it tell me I was just an amorphous shape, something bendable to a likeness, a responsive miracle? When she came crawling up to me at night, 3 a.m., her hair in a mess, my daughter reported to me that there was a witch in her room. It dogged her at the abyss. Not tigers, not lions, not bears, just a bad witch. We crawled back over the floor to get it, that witch. Sprayed it with rose petal water just to erase it. Suffering, sadness, soul searching, these are nothing to a witch. We sprayed it dead there in the abyss where the immense journey is. That kind of love. Look at you all clapping. How sweet. So this third poem is the sort of center anchoring poem. And it's a strange poem in that it's not terribly literal. What I found myself writing about was the grotesque that started to happen in all of the protests by 2016 and 17, that they all became kind of garish at some level and kind of volatile and kind of disruptive and full of misalignment, violations of consent, really. And so I found myself writing this poem, trying to understand the undercurrent of the grotesque that happens when people cannot search their own shadow for their own darkness, and so they act it out, which I think the whole country became pulled into like through a slip knot. I'm not sure it's even out of it. Politics isn't out of it. And so that this poem tries to get at that. The grotesque. Do you remember what we saw there, holding hands together in the dreary olive noontide? That the sea, a sad effluvium of plastic refuse, had turned itself into a gray morass, decomposing in the near twilight, and it had settled silently like a sad fog to the shore. How the lovers, embracing, co-authored the fires up in the hills, and the protests, everything seemed at first to be the enterprise of an uprising, a gate. Even the shore, lit up in flaming candles, appeared beautiful, a floral banquet. And the concierge there, tuxedoed, held open a paper gate that we entered and sat us at various tablecloth tables with decanters of wine there. And we listened to TVs back behind us, where the world's conversation about art and society had turned into a quarreling throng of people drowning one another out over subjects like culture and sex, war and religion, like a routing out of love's final, lost, remaining languor. The grotesque, like a carnival, parades always, and the major with his armies marches outward against time. Its ultimate prisoner, the imago, all our vibrant inner identities. That the grotesque takes the body, all the beauty of it, like a parasite. Thievery, the biggest sin, being the ultimate happy hour party. Even the protests took on a brutish, occupational, angry tone. Appropriation is the first resort of the cloaked thief, the magpie. And politics is the hostile aim of the few against the many. And in the salons, even the birds in their cages resorted to imitation. Style as ornamentation turned cheap within a rancid, vulgar luster. And the mouth, as a body part, a whole, became the focal point of all news. And the original in us, like a rare pearl, was muted, muddied in the sand. And the angels of mercy, so shy, withered back into the laurel hills. Now we were given royal treatment, a dinner party away from it all. And that the dancers spinning spun a seed from the cocoon. Some kind of seed that would unsettle us against each other, would make us join tribes as a kind of affiliation in kind. That's what we saw there, odd, so dangerous. That the grotesque masquerades as a belonging, tempting us all to dine. So I'd like to follow that rather confrontive poem with a sweet poem that I wrote that pays attention to what artists can do when they allow themselves to inhabit sweetness and beauty. In and of itself, the poem's basic idea is it commemorates a bar singer, a solo young woman playing on her guitar in a bar in St. Petersburg a million years ago. And she was the opening act for a rough rock and roll band, which I completely lost interest in because what she did with her moment there under the mic, with the mic was transcendent. And so this poem celebrates the sweetness when somebody inhabits that kind of leap into rapture. Bar singer. To become as baroque as this singer, strumming her guitar outside the bar while the customers line up, shove in, mark their seats for the main act, a rock band from Muskego made mostly of bar brawls and metal noise and the fumbled rage behind all envy. I'd have to undress the marked frets of my body the whole way so that I would fall up the stairs, all of me, just like she's going to do in an hour as the patrons yell and throw darts. Maybe we have to fall up the stairs of life just to move from the lower rungs of it. And as she sings her way into the evening's immaculate, drunken approval, she and I will become uplifted into the hurt but magnificent, luminous bareness of one note now, simple yet extravagant. Isn't that always the ordeal of the true singer-songwriter? To be ornamental, even when the breaking heart's wreckage, so undone, delivers itself to midnight and a lonesome guitar solo. She's a brunette, an introvert, psalmic, an improbable opening act for this all-male bar band, especially as she lifts her voice in a plaintive hum singing, just like a resplendent thrush. And she winds her voice around the song's crisp trail lines by twisting affect all around it. She's deliberate, so evangelistic, as if each word, each one noun were a history, a picturesque fume, a flame with no flag, except that lone flag of sweetness, all of it, like a song I could climb into forever. So all of us were poets, were probably under some mandate to write a pandemic poem. And so I wrote one. What makes this poem interesting to me, as I reread it and tried to figure out what it was really saying to me, was that there are actually three little forms of consent that show up in this poem. The first one was unexpected because I was flirting with a young woman as I was buying pink roses for my wife. I started flirting with her because I couldn't see her smile because she had this stupid mask on, so I flirted with her. And she played back with me to my utter elation. The second consent was a consent between my wife and I while we were watching the third consent, which was and will be two birds making babies in the clematis. So what joins all of these little consents in this poem is the title of the poem, which is called The Angel of the Wonderful, which will save our lives. The Angel of the Wonderful. The young woman at the counter, masked in a bandana because of the pandemic, smiled a floral smile with her eyes at me. I'd placed a dozen pink roses before her. She picked stealthily at the faded petals, one by one, removing those dull, wrinkled petals already withered by long days in the cool storage fridge, and I, because I couldn't help my loneliness. Offered up to her a comment that on a brand new day, I might see the smile behind her scarf breaking into a delirium of cardinals catching flame. And she, not missing a point, said, "Oh, you too." And when I complimented her quick-paced fingers, clipping the dull petals from each worshipped rose, she said briskly to me, "No unhappy roses sold here. Only happy roses for the ones we love." And something of the air and audience lighted. And when I left her, my arms full of pink roses, right there in love's body, I was the one. I was infinite. Oh, yes. And on that warm morning when we studied the small gray sparrows mating in the clematis, right there in a hulk pod formed like an oval in the tangle, my wife whispered to me, "They're mating in there." And the angel of the wonderful said, "Oh, real presence always holds the eternal in it." And I said, loving something is a cleansing of it. And the angel, empty of God because it was here in my yard and borrowing a matter of days in form, said to me, yes, the light of all mana falls like traced God from upper space. It hangs. It hangs like flora in the open air, and that is the yearning. We all feel, feeling it. And those not yet dulled or obliterated by a self, consumed by what's already been stolen from it, touch it. And they enjoy holding on to it, this mana. And they allow their yearning to test the test of time until they too are won over by the ceremony of the wonderful. And what was a dull patina on them brightens, and this the wonderful, like fresh-grown roses. And the two small, glorified sparrows hovered in the hovel, and the one behind the other tagged her. He tagged her oh so gently, and he entered her like a feathered fullness, voiding himself of unstrained light, while the other, the female, like a small oven, a dust rose, moved backward, inward, all light. Thank God I'm almost done because I get to read Joy's poem. So this closing poem just celebrates two lovers building a consent with the sunset as it falls down. It's called All the World a Stage. At the intimate moment of fire, they held hands outside the barn, watched the fire consuming the whole building, popping it like confetti stars. They saw the black apple trees catching flame, saw the open yard where the horses run, igniting up, the hay wagon combusting, the water trough filling up with watery ash, with flames of morning. And they saw the roadside bursting into corn-colored cashew. And they watched the old hickory tree exploding, the rope swing on it, rocking back and forth, ghosted in feral smoke. And they saw the clouds above them expanding with lungs of purple, and game birds, grouse, lark, wild duck, pheasant, suddenly escaping into herald and haze. The sky above them now garbanzo bean, now garlic, now slices of fibrous rhubarb, colored greens, heat. As if all the horizon could be exhumed at dusk. And they saw the church steeple in the blue distance, piercing the ganache of skylight like a sewing needle. And they watched the first stars rising distant like salt and pepper. The new moon hanging heavily like someone's soda cracker. She held a box saw in her hand. He opened up an accordion, and slowly he pumped it into sound, while the farmhouse beyond them glowed like a tabernacle of the day's last fire. Something filled with hope and awe and glory. And they saw the sun setting behind it, all the world a stage. So I'm going to begin. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you again, Susan, for hosting us. I'm going to begin by actually introducing Joy so that I can weave my commentary about Joy into my commentary about this poem. So I meant what I said when I think that Joy and I are writers that celebrate the fire of spirit inside substance. And so she called me, or I called her. She texted me and said, let's talk at 3:00. And she proposed this typical, sweet, cool, fun Joy idea, which would be that I would read one of her poems and she would read one of mine, which you will hear her do. And so I was audacious, and I took what I think is one of the best poems in this new chapbook of hers. It stuns me, this poem. And the reason it stuns me is because the thing that I truly, truly admire about this writer, that makes me go back to her when I'm stuck, when I'm sort of stuck in a pall and I don't have imagination anymore, is that Joy is fierce in how she writes with the marriage of violence and tenderness in her poems, which always makes me interested because she's audacious in how she notices how things fragile can be extinguished. But what makes her so attractive to me is that she actually notices that spirit is strong inside the fragile. And it's that part of what she notices, whether she's talking about persons or things that are vanquished from the world, that fills me up. So I was telling her and teasing her a little bit today at 3:00, saying that, Phil Levine said he didn't give a damn about his poetry unless it was useful. And I find Joy's work useful because she defends the strength of the fragile inside the strong. And it's that fragile flame that is actually the strong flame that makes me just love your work, Joy. And so it is in the celebration of that I read this beautiful poem called Feeding the Birds, and you will see what I mean because of the way she carefully juxtaposes imagery, but that is actually meaning clashing with meaning to synergize into new meaning. And it's that I find so interesting in her work that revives me. Feeding the Birds. First, you must love wings, feathers, the cautious heart, the way what is fragile perches on the soul. And for sure, you must want to keep things alive, the way history gives wings to time. Watch, you'll see the patterns, how the mighty win their place, feed their young with that knowledge. You will see that blue jays bully cardinals, but the grackles arrive, ready to fight. You will learn about exile and return. Eventually, feeding will become an obsession. And because our souls are shaped like hands opening and closing on what we love, your garage will fill with sweat sails, black oilers stored in metal containers, sugar water in the fridge. We are all small gods, our hearts fierce, yet strangely weak. And here's the grip. When there is loss or sorrow, they will feed you. Because when the rains come, even when the rains come, the birds feed, the birds sing. I introduce you, Joy. Go set the room on fire.
Oh my goodness. I'm a bit overwhelmed. Thank you, Ken. Beyond belief. Thank you. You are also my inspiration. You know that. I keep his books around me when I'm writing, and there's not a line that doesn't move me into spirit and thought. Thank you, Ken. And thank you for reading that poem so beautifully. Like I said, I'm a little overwhelmed, but I'm going to dive in. I'm going to actually begin by reading Ken's poem. I'm going to read his poem, Witness. I took some notes, Ken, while you were reading earlier. And, you know, the idea of consent, of distance, and the consent of truth, and the consent to inhabit the other. I love that idea, the consent to inhabit the other, or the consent to inhabit the world. And that begins with witness. That begins with witness. Witness as a kind of promise. Okay. So I begin this poem. I don't think I ever considered that the birds were staring right back at me. Everything has its eyes, even the blind rock sitting so silently on the wooded path. Even the fallen leaves trying to remember. Even the eyeless dead fish rotting blind in the pond. All things gather one at a time to witness. Even the parade of stars rising over a barn. I don't remember what it was the woods said to me when they warned me I'd been found there alone, trying to stop myself from telling the truth of what I saw in myself, that I was just a lie. But at the edge of the river, we witnessed it, that I was afraid of accepting myself. Everyone is afraid of accepting themselves because they can't let themselves witness just what they are, the woods said. And all I could do was try to understand what couldn't be said. Somewhere out in the forest dark, we heard coyotes screaming every laugh they had. To witness, I think, is to follow a path of allowance. Whatever happens, just does. It's so difficult to let a river canoe you, but that's always what happens, isn't it? It's so difficult to let a river canoe you, but that's always what happens, isn't it? Love's just what the breezes do through trees, by spreading rumors at the edge of the forest that awakens awe inside empty space. I never knew it, that love was primarily a movement experience. Endings, too, are witness experiences. I was told this in Atlanta once by a woman I was dating. She made me fresh coffee and bid me goodbye, whispered to me the high clouds and sunshine rise and dim slowly, effortlessly, like death. Every river's flux explains all that to me. Oh, to be the witness, and always to be, to inhabit the other. Thank you for that wonderful poem. Okay, I'm going to start my reading with a sonnet. That wonderful 14-line poem that just We see it on the page and we want it. It's like a beautiful flower. Not lasting, the not lasting. I am walking the edge of the yard, spring leaving, when a dragonfly, purple as oil, lands weightless on my arm. For a moment, I see myself in the road wing of wings and the thin current of body. Some things seem too delicate to survive. Still, they do. I try to memorize what I know will leave. What cannot last landed on my arm like a stunning sorrow. Yet some splendor in the not lasting, the way a child builds a tower of blocks for the tumbling after. I'm learning how to wait for the next revelation without lament for the last. Just now, birdsong and sunblush through the trees. A kind of witness. Deportation. I resolved to stop noticing detainees shuffled into sheriff vans, the unmarked buildings along the Detroit River. Resolved not to feel bereaved, numbed as a caged 6-year-old. I'm making my world smaller, finding beauty in the faceless butterfly, all wings and feelers, conspicuous flight. Bring holiness into every aspect of your life, Moses tells us. I'm making my world smaller. A little laugh at the wild turkey antics around the neighbor's deck. A note on the sidewalk that reads simply, yes. I'm taking a leap around the devastated islands, trying not to breathe in the fumes and ash, the acres of fire. I refuse to be consumed by the wild things seeking escape. The sonnet, they say, is the music of love. I'm listening. I'm listening. Yes. I'm making my world smaller. Eggplant and rosemary, red grapes, or maybe just peanut butter and jelly for dinner. We all have to survive, right? A few poems from Stone on Your Stone, which is a co-winner of the Michigan Friends of Poetry Celery City Chapbook Prize. There were 4 winners, 2 from our area, myself and Diana Dinverno, and 2 poets from the west side of the state. My pandemic poem, dedicated to Ken. This is called The Undersoul Speaks the Truth. During early stages of the pandemic, I don't know about you, but I was watching, who's the guy in New York, who was the mayor of New York, who was on constantly, right? Forget his name. But anyway, I was watching that endlessly. He was sort of my lifeline during our lockdown. The Undersoul speaks the truth during early stages of pandemic. It's got an epigraph. Hart Island has been used for more than 150 years as a place to bury the city's unidentified or unclaimed dead, or those whose families can't afford to pay for a burial. The homeless are brought to me. Here, mass graves in fields behind abandoned factories, old psych hospitals. You don't believe me? Get yourself a drone. And that's not all. There are deals being made, like the one that tricked Eve. Sinister? You do know, don't you, that those wrenching wrens with their wondrous voices invade the nests of others, stab holes in their eggs to widen their territory. Don't be afraid. This is nothing new. It's just that there is less and less resistance. My powers are numerous. spider silk, sudden die-off, plague, radio waves, drought, the homeless. You've heard the word disappear. I promise you forget what's missing. Besides, it's hard to miss what's been hidden from you. I offer the pink oleander in full bloom to do what you want with. You do know it's poisonous, right? The great thing is I'm there for you too, offering photosynthesis, offering a few kisses in the dark. I draw you in that way. Strange how you seek clover as long as there is a fourth leaflet. I don't blame you though. It's hard to count on luck. My expertise is the sleight of hand, the world of distraction. Go ahead, try to tame me. I'll just start another fire. Thank you all. This poem, the title is a fact. The title is a fact. The Hebrew word for mysticism is the same word as to receive. Mysticism and to receive. In the parking lot between brick buildings on campus, a girl dropped to the pavement like a bird shot. Her body shimmied, a rain stick, blood from her lip. The Hmong say simply of epilepsy, the spirit leaves you and you fall down. I knelt beside her, took her hand. Consider the soul, and when it becomes attached to the body, how after death it hangs around a while. What fear it must be to lose such a bond. I don't know how I knew to sit on the pavement and wait, stroke her hand. It's okay, you're okay. Thinking she must hate this fate while we waited for her spirit to return. Her body calmed, eyes opened. I sat with her. She stared up at me. Thank you all. I can't really see you guys, but I know you're there, and that matters. Let's see. Okay, so, Ken and I, it's so funny because we really write about the same things. I mean, exactly the same things. I mean, Ken always distills his poems down to love. And I say that, pretty much all writing is about love. I mean, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to say all writing is about love and can be distilled that way. But we use similar tracks, although we do it so differently. He uses a lot of music. When I was 21, I traveled with a band cross country. And so this is a new poem. It's called Traveling with the Band. The band is headed to California, the equipment loaded in the backbeat of a station wagon. Michael driving, smoking a cigarette, the road singing yes, 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 matching the rhythm of hostility's dissipating snare. Go ahead, condemn me. I come from the school of loneliness, where girls uninterested in cake making are activists, champions of the underdog, rooters for the left-handed music makers. I waited for this chance to throw off those lonely headphones, where I let Zeppelin spin a whole lot of love around my head, my elbows rooted to the carpet in my room. Waited through the next lie from my boyfriend and the next boyfriend and the next lie. Still, I wanted them, their desire infused with mine. The way Coltrane describes truth as indestructible and innovation as departure from the customary. Maybe lies are just a small dispute with change, and creativity a way out of the airlessness of convention. Accept the hurt. Let it become Van Gogh tree branches, curly, like my long hair, longing hair. Michael is smoking a cigarette. I am in the car with him and the drums and amps, his Fender guitar, headed to South Padre Island, Texas, where for a month there will be a piano in my hotel room. Then on to Colorado, where Michael and I will trip up the mountains to Pikes Peak into the bluest sky I've ever seen, where the urge for going, as Joni sings, is for me the antidote to indignity. The self-imposed outcast, choosing to cast outward, leave humiliation waiting, sucker punches, lies, leave it. Leave the damn wallpaper behind. Oh, how the 70s were a time. They were a time. They were a time. A few more poems. I reject a famous poet who once told me, do not say the word love in a poem. But here it is. It will turn into a glass door. A bird will fly into it. You must wear a wetsuit around it. The newspapers will fly into its face. Yesterday's game loss sits on it like a tantrum. This is getting annoying. It is the water coursing through the baseboard heat, the caroling fan that works then doesn't, the scissors too dull to make a smooth cut. It can't get through easily, it shifts. Rather than throw it out, find a hardware store with a good sharpener. What do we give ourselves over to when we act a bit kinder? Oh, the staccato percolations on the gutters when it starts to rain. And I think, let's make coffee. Say earth. Say save us, dear love, from our droughts. Today, rain pings the skylight. For too long, the redbud has survived without enough water. And finally, love. I mean, rain. No one, especially me, knew the effects of drought until I saw that tree go plump, its heartwood fully hydrated. Poets know about love, right? There was a Gilmore Girls episode in which Jess said, poets know about love, let's go ask them. I find hilarious. Just a few more poems, two more, and then a final poem. This is called My Life is a Ball Bearing, and it's in my book. I had to care for my mother. I had to care for my parents, actually, my father. Then as he was dying, my mother became ill, and I spent 8 years taking care of her. So this is how I felt. I felt like a bit of smooth machinery. My life is a ball bearing. Smooth then, I rolled with it all, left friction to others, evened the operations of my mother's dementia, my brother's broken pieces. Spherical, there were no sides to me, only continuous fluidity, movement. Exhaustion rolled under numbers, financial advisors, neurologists, lawyers. Phone calls in the night. I was ring-like and hardened as steel, but for the purpose of glide. Revolving as my mother, who thought she'd been arrested, then realized she'd made a mistake. Look around, Ma. Do you see any cops? Fluid when I cleaned out her desk and found a pair of underwear. I was heavily weighted, but knew about viscosity of counterforce. My mother, a rotating shaft, and me, a fixed housing of hardened steel balls. I rolled, helped bear the load of it, kept my brother, metal to metal, a rotating shaft of danger, kept him from heating up, blowing it all to pieces. In a second. There's a poem I really want to read, so hang on one second. Okay. This poem is actually a golden shovel. And I thank Kelly Fordham for giving me the writing prompt. And she said, write a golden shovel. I would not have done it otherwise. So bless you, dear poets. We all are connected. It's that what it's that what is it? Consent. Sorry, it's that consent. We connect with each other. This is called We Will Not March Back. And the golden shovel, if you go down the right, you see the language, the words of a poem. And in this case, it's from Amanda Gordon. It's from her poem, The Hill We Climb. And her words are, we will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. Those are her words. My poem has nothing to do with hers. I just had fun with this. My poem is called We Will Not March Back, and it's after Amanda Gordon. It's for Linda, my friend who was killed by her husband. I am the one who once thought that we would track the sky together, the will of long-necked herons seeking open water, not this forced aloneness, this march through gunshot, trying to find our way back. Consider a staircase of missing risers. It's easier to descend. Hidden holes hide the risk of slipping into what could plunge us into denuded space. At 5, I was terrified by those dark gaps, but still I braved the basement to move toward what could be discovered there, to see my grandfather and the eyes of what he painted. Beautiful faces, all the shall and shalt not formalities he knew to be truth, simply by being alive, unlabeled, unafraid of country. At 15, we believed in the tilt-a-whirl, that spinning was a metaphor for what is and would be our future, sure to leave us bruised but willing, bruised but whole. We hungered for the benevolent, hung Janis Joplin and Bob Dylan on our walls, but got guns instead. Women rose bold with power, our bodies fierce, but for that gun, your husband's gun, and his lion's roar, we'd whirl, we'd spin, free. I shall end now with my last poem. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here, taking in language, poetry. Please support literary arts programs. They change children's lives, they change adults' lives. And please, let's not forget Ukraine. This poem, my final poem, is also a sonnet. Find a roost. When the wrongs of the world feel too big, look toward what is small. Seek the sculpture outside the memorial center, the pattern of a dragonfly wing, places in which we live, places in which to live alongside disasters. Go at dusk to the old smokestack, preserved as sanctuary, a roosting site for swifts, tens of thousands of swifts. Gather yourself to witness the flight of migration. Be the chirping call, the cacophony of community. Join the gathering, the sound and swirl. Let the world feel cooperative. Funnel into a safe place. Aren't we all the epitome of such delicacy and strength? When the wrongs of the world feel too small, find the smaller, bigger things. Thank you. A good night.
Wow, thank you so much, Joy and Ken, for your engaging poetry that just it traveled through time and space with the musical beat. in the natural and spiritual world. I'm so moved and so delighted to have the two of you read A Celebration of Poetry for the Royal Oak Public Library. Thank you so much for coming, everybody, and for your beautiful work. If you want, Joy and Ken, can you share where people might find your books to purchase your work? You want to put it in the chat box. There's so many wonderful comments in the chat box I could read to you. There'll be a recording of them. All right. Thank you very much, Joy and Ken.
Thank you, Susan, for hosting this and everybody for coming. And Ken, you just overwhelmed me with your beautiful poems.
There are 64 comments in the chat box.
How lovely. How lovely. I echo that. Thank you also to the tech support who, without them, we would be nowhere at all, at all.
Here, here.
Thanks again to Susan as well. Love that so many faces showed up. It makes me less lonely as I yearn for public readings again. But I think we did this proud. I'm reminded again about what Leonard Cohen says when he says that poetry and contemplation creates a toughness in him, a toughness that helps him survive hard times. That's what your poetry does with me, Joy. Frankly, that's what a lot of the Faces I See's poetry does for me. It creates a toughness of spirit, which we so badly need so that we can just be bright lights in a tough time. So
I let Ken speak for me because he speaks so beautifully.
Well said. Thank you, Ken. Thank you again, Joy. Everybody, take good care.